I'd like to call the annual meeting of the Central Midwest District of the Mid-America region of the Unitarian Universalist Association for the year 2012 to order. And since the chalice has already been lit this morning, I would like to lead us in the recitation of the affirmation of our covenant, which is printed on your agenda. Let's blend our voices now. We, the people of the Central Midwest District, affirm the UU principles and purposes as a guide to align our actions with our values. We covenant in word and deed with a spirit of acceptance, reason and compassion, voicing our concerns and using grace in disagreement. Madam Secretary, I ask you to assess our quorum. Oh, in fact, I have the number. As a matter of fact, we have at last count 115 registered delegates from our member congregation, so we do, in fact, have a quorum. Thank you very much. I'd ask now, after you've had a chance to look at your annual meeting packet with the appended reports, I'd ask for a motion to accept approval of this agenda for the annual meeting.
Move.
So moved. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. I'd also like to now recognize the committee on the 2012 meeting minutes. That is composed of me, Dick Bocard from the Unitarian Church of Evanston, Cheryl Tucker-Lowy from First Unitarian Church of Alton, and our secretary, Tracy Howe-Koch. I would like to welcome you to our meeting this morning. And speaking for our board and our staff, we are deeply appreciative of the time you've taken to interrupt your busy schedules to be with us at this time. As I indicated in my president's letter, which we sent out with our packets about 6 weeks ago and have posted online, this is an extraordinary time for our denomination and for liberal religion in the Midwest, as I alluded to in my comments last night. And so what we would try to do is to bring the spirit and our strength of democratic governance and participation, actively leadership, and forward-looking ministry. That aspect of our movement may not change. However, the way that we do business with governance and staff delivery will change, and I'll be talking about that along with Ian and Dory when we get to the discussion on regionalism later in the program. Just so that you know, since we have been here on site in Oak Brook, Ian, Dory, and I, and the board, we have been, I think, very, very gratified by the number of helpful comments that we've received from all of you about the way that we deliver services and constructive comments about how the things we might want to consider about regionalism as we move forward. And I very much thank you. There has been a noteworthy sort of absence of sort of tension and anxiety about this in the system, and I appreciate that from all of you. So please give yourselves a round of applause. I'd also like to entertain a motion for the final approval of the annual meeting minutes from April 2011. And again, those are included in your annual meeting packet. So I look now for a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Please.
In reading through my notes, about a half dozen typos and things like that, do you want notification of that, or is that not working?
Please, if you would, Alan, so that you could mention that to, so that we could accept that to both Peggy and to Tracy, if you would. All right. Thanks. So then I would amend the motion, if I'm hearing that correctly, Alan, so that the minutes would be accepted with approval with a caveat that essentially the editing would be tightened up. Is that acceptable to the assemblage?
Yes.
That said, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so Ian, if you want to come forward, here he is, and he has the handheld microphone. And if we would, I'm going to give Ian some time to give his perspective on this in terms of consolidation of the staff and service delivery, and then I can get into my PowerPoint presentation.
It's wonderful to be here with you. Very briefly, about 10 years ago, the key leaders in this region began to realize that there was a series of interconnected changes happening that made it necessary to do business in new ways, or really more accurately, to develop further some kinds of cooperative work we were already doing. Many of you are familiar with the Midwest Leadership School, which is a cooperative venture of the 3 districts, Prairie Star to our west, Heartland to our east, and ourselves. It was begun over 30 years ago. It is a cooperative leadership education program that none of us could have, more ambitious than any of us could have launched on our own, that we did together, and has become a beloved institution. The thing we began to realize is that that kind of thing needed to be the pattern of the future. And the reasons are what I call my 3-legged stool. First, the future of congregations is evolving. The current structure for districts began at a time where the standard model for congregations was to have 1 minister and 1 religious educator as the key staff. Well, and so mirroring that, you had a district executive type in this district called a congregational services director, and here that's myself, and specializing in the sort of ministry things and working with ministers. And you had a religious educator type, which in this district would have been Dory. Well, your congregations have evolved so that in the vast majority, how you do staffing often has no paid professional leadership in many of our congregations, and in our larger congregations has an ever-growing array of different professionals. Administrators have developed greatly, membership people, many different sorts of positions. And those structural changes are indicative of a broader changing you are all making to the different religious landscape. Facebook, for instance. Facebook has become a necessary part of the ministry of our congregations. A minister of about my generation said to me not long ago that he's realized in the last 6 months that for him, Facebook is not optional, because that's where his congregation, especially the younger members of his congregation, talk about important things among themselves. And he can't afford not to be part of that. So there's this mass of technological things also changing. Even the idea of membership of organizations. My daughter is about as committed a UU as you can get. She helped co-lead the fund drive at Beverly Unitarian Church, my home church, last year. But I don't think she's ever going to go to first Tuesday of the month committee meetings. I just don't think her participation in our community is going to be like that. Besides, things have changed economically. She says to me, Dad, I'm never going to be able to afford the house I grew up in. And this is interesting. The generation that's now entering their professional lives, the economy is going to be very different also. So all of this is going to require very different sorts of institutions, and it's going to require our congregations to shift greatly. And so the same structure we had won't work to help support you in doing that. So that's the first leg of the three-legged stool. What you need is shifting. Second leg of the three-legged stool is the technology. What is possible technologically has shifted, so we don't need what we had. We had a district office, and it was really kind of a shrine around a high-volume copier. I mean, you had a big table where you could do mailings, and a big room where you could file paper. And that was about it. When we wanted to meet, we had to rent a separate room. Well, that just didn't serve. But we can distribute things electronically. And we can do our accounting online. And indeed, every year, more things become technologically possible. More people are going to hear my words from the recording on the internet than are here today. The majority of the listeners won't be face-to-face. And that's wonderful. And to some degree, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So that's wonderful. So the technology makes connection easier. One of the reasons for the old structure was to have it be sort of possible for a person living in a central location to drive to all the congregations. Well, the further west you get, the crazier that is. My colleague in Denver has a district that goes all the way from the Canadian border to the Mexican border. So that wasn't working anyway. But that aside, doing all the things electronically and not needing to go to the office to work in the same way, greatly changes what we need. It makes it possible for us not to have to pay for a brick and mortar office. The third thing is money. The third leg of the three-legged stool is money. We can't afford a lot of the things we used to be able to afford. And this is because you can't afford a lot of the things you used to be able to afford. First in your personal lives, and then in the amount you give your congregations, and then in the amount that the congregations give to us. And it's a reality. It's not, well, I was going to say it's not bad or good. I mean, it's bad. We'd like more. But we want to be able to use the more we hope that you will be able to give us to build new programs, not to hold together a structure which is basically too expensive. And part of what's happened in the last few years is we have tried to hold together a structure which is basically too expensive, is we cut exactly where you would cut. I mean, things like travel. Well, every dollar that you cut from my travel budget or Dory's travel budget is 2-3 miles less that we come and visit you. And that kind of making things work wasn't working, that we had to look at the whole thing differently. So those are the three reasons for this movement. Now, there's a negative in that I wanted to make sure you get, that people wonder whether somebody else is pushing it on us. And the answer, to an amazing degree, is no. There is not the UUA who is saying this ought to happen. Quite to the contrary, this is emerging in the different regions across the country, and the central office of our association is working to understand and try to help it develop coherently. But I've never once got a phone call from anyone saying, I'd wish you'd do this faster. More often, it's a little bit of confusion about how many changes are happening. So it's not anything that's being pushed on us. But it's one of the most exciting things that I've been part of. It is very scary because it does have this dimension of huge pressure to it. And it arises from the huge pressure on you. Every day I talk with a congregation that had said, well, you know, we had hoped for a full-time minister in 2 years, but we now see we have to rethink that, and we have to figure out a way to do that over 4 years. Or we'd hoped for this building expansion, but we have to, somebody joked that modern building expansions today for UU churches are all about insulation. But there's something profound about that. Congregations also are working on sustainable structures. And I'd say many of us are working on that in our personal lives also. I mean, I certainly am when I'm thinking about retiring. You know, what is a sustainable way to structure this? So that's the reason for what we're doing, and all else follows from that. Now, there are two separate sides to it. One is the administration and program side, and the other is the governance side. And the staff takes the lead on the program and administration side, and our board, or the three boards, takes the lead on figuring out what the governance will be. And the last piece of this is that all we are doing is creating a frame within which you can work. And beyond that, there's just a whole lot of I don't knows. Take a gathering like this. It's relatively self-sustaining. Not when you count the staff time, but the out-of-pocket costs, are paid for pretty much by you. So there's not a huge budgetary pressure to shift it. And I just don't know whether we want to gather in a group roughly like this, or whether we would prefer a larger gathering with higher profile people that we'd have to travel further to. Whether reinforcing the more local connections, which a group like this does, is more important than developing a wider set of connections. And we're going to need to figure out all those things. And this general idea of regionalization does not come with an answer to any of those questions. It's something that we look forward to doing with you on each specific part of it. And all I can say about that is I expect it to be collaborative, and I expect it to be unexpected. Well, all right. I don't know. A lot of you I know have been around the association a long time and know that there have been discussions about moving to every second year General Assembly. Right, okay. I see some heads nodding. Within my memory, there's 3 times we've sort of gotten up to the edge of that high dive and then kind of crawl back in. No, we want it every year. In part because the people who go to General Assembly are the ones who vote on whether there should be General Assembly. Okay, I'm not going to believe it till it happens. But my hunch is that if we would all decide to have General Assembly every second year, that you all might want to have some larger thing that the region did where we could have more GA-like experience in the off year. You might decide that. Or one reason we have said that I mean in talking with you and in myself, that we don't want a regional assembly is we'd have to travel further. Do you know the first region that has one planned? It's the West. All right, well that's what I said. How does that figure? Well, people out there are telling me we're used to traveling. And it really doesn't matter that much when we have to travel that far to travel a little further. And that we're different from the East that way. Well, So I expect many unexpected things to emerge in what we all decide we want. But what I want you to know now is that we want to decide all of those things with you, and that the overall move to create a common structure doesn't come with a decision about any of those things that are part of it. And the whole structure, we hope, is a way of bringing all of you into better, deeper, and more authentic relationship with each other and with the wider movement. Thank you.
Okay, that was the easy part. And I'm sure that we'll have some time, a reasonable amount of time for questions after I finish up my presentation on governance. And I'm going to try to get through this as expeditiously as I can to facilitate that question, those questions. But I also want to be mindful that you have to hear commentary on the budget, the appended budget, which will allow us to fund a transition to the new region, hopefully, and to elect candidates for what may be our last elected district board, and to recognize those on the nominating committee who worked so hard to make this happen. So we do have still other things to get through the agenda on, plus items for new business. But if I could ask Margaret and Peg to push forward the discussion on regionalism. This little sheet that I put together over the last 24 hours is kind of a compendium of questions that I heard when I met with the District Laredo chapter and the Ministers chapter earlier this week, as well as some conversations with some of you. And you've helped me sort of develop the discipline of keeping things very telescoped, very specific, and very simple. And I think that simple, straightforward, is a good thing. And will allow us to have more rich discussions. And then I'll get to a slideshow right after that. So people have asked me before, what is regionalism? And this is one person's attempt, feeble though it may be, to describe what I see regionalism being. I'm not attempting to speak for any of you or for my district president colleagues, Amy Taylor or Kathy Burek, but you can read it. It says regionalism is a term used to describe a process by which a new staff configuration, which Ian just talked about, comprised of those formerly affiliated with contiguous districts, Prairie Star, Heartland, CMWD, provide services to congregation in the area associated with those districts, and which is governed by an entity sanctioned by the congregations within its boundaries. That's you, all of you. And I'll talk about what potential governance models are available to us in just a bit, but let's move to the next question. What does regionalism mean for congregations? And this is a question I heard yesterday, basically people saying, what does regionalism mean for me personally? How is this going to affect me? And there are kind of two responses to that. Well, it could affect you a lot if you're involved in Unitarian Universalism on a broader scale outside the walls of your congregation, or it may not necessarily affect you that much at all if you don't care. I'm not that kind of person, just to let you know. So what does regionalism mean for congregations? My answer is, and this is mine alone, it means that congregations might have to rely on ways other than face-to-face contact to benefit from consultation from staff and from lay leaders. Last clause of that sentence, I think, is very important. Ian gave you the good news, the constructive news, about what staff may do to be able to apply assistance to congregations who called them up in April saying, oh, we're having problems with the budget, or we're having a minister fight, or we don't know what to do, and can you help us? Ian is quite right. It is a complete fiction, and this is the bad news, for any one of us to believe that the staff will be as physically accessible to us as they have been in the past system. But with technology, and I emphasize this point, because here's where your responsibility is going to come into play. With technology, anytime I need to speak to Ian, and I talk to him a lot, he's accessible to me. All I have to do is call his cell phone, or we can Skype, Nancy Combs-Morgan, Dory Davenport. It's going to mean some distance with face-to-face, from face-to-face contact with the staff, because it won't be humanly possible for them to get from Minneapolis to Kentucky on a daily basis. However, what I'm imagining out of this is to say that there will be a group in smaller regional clusters, like in local St. Louis, or the Chicago Area Youth Council, or SUIT, that there would be a cadre of ministers and lay leaders who would be able to provide support on a personal, face-to-face basis, would be empowered, trained, supported to work with congregations on a one-to-one basis. Now, that sort of model exists in our history, both in Unitarianism, in Universalism, and in Unitarian Universalism, when we couldn't necessarily rely on the district executive or the staff person responsible for religious education in the district model to be able to be there, to pick up the phone, and then to drive down to St. Louis. There was more of that contact relying on congregational leaders in the past. And I think this is going to be a part of our future. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very good thing, because that's going to build capacity in the congregations on a lateral scale. So says me. Question. And I've got a member of my congregation who says this. He's, a high-level management person, technology. And when we started talking about this, he started to lean back, as Unitarians will do, and this is sort of, look of skepticism on the face that we all know very well. And he said, this is really just a cost-cutting move, isn't it? Really just, cutting staff to the bone because we can't afford it anymore. Well, as Ian said, we're all dealing with the reality of reduced financial resources. We're not happy about it. It makes us uncomfortable. It means we have to stretch out our retirement savings. We can't give as much to our children as we would like. We can't give as much to our churches as we would like. And they have had a downward pull on resources. And they have forced staff to either collaborate with other stakeholders to run a program, or to turn a program over to another group congenial to liberal religion. What I mean by that is, say, for example, I think of Unity Temple. They're well represented. Please raise your hand, members of Unity Temple. Great. Well done. Thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to brag on them some more. Through the work of their ministry staff and some committed lay leaders, they've partnered with the Community Renewal Society to expand their consciousness and work in social justice. They just took 30 members of their congregation down by bus with other members, with other congregants from other churches in the Chicago area, to advocate for progressive legislation down the legislature, General Assembly down in Springfield. It wasn't a UU-led movement. It's a group of other congregations led by a visionary group in the Chicago area. That's the future for us when it comes to social justice. We have talked about, for example, development of an advocacy network. Ken showed from First Churches here, UANI, so that we would have, in effect, a sort of a lobbying arm in Springfield. Great. What? How's that? Okay, well, not lobby, but it's to be a presence, right? I knew that was going to happen. A voice was going to come out from the dark, right? Right. I'm getting there on this point, Ken, is that that's going to be a collaborative effort amongst congregations, and my suspicion would be, and what I hear from our legislative group in California, that if this gets off the ground, and I think that it will, that we'll be partnering with other faith traditions to advance our social justice initiatives. That's where American religion is going. It's where social justice initiatives are going. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Okay, end of this. Okay, I brazenly stole this. It was something that my beloved colleague, Amy Taylor in the Heartland District, put together for their district assembly. But I wanted you to see the same thing. And this is what they saw at Prairie Star as well. So it was the same level of PowerPoint presentations. And I'll try to go this as quickly because I don't believe in death by PowerPoint. Death we can't escape, but not death by PowerPoint. Okay, so that's the great opening sort of phrase, and you can hear the music and the strings playing in the background. Okay, so regional governance. We will design it. Ian wasn't lying. This is something we designed. We have only the authority to develop a governance structure that you, representatives of the congregations, can give us. Okay? And as Ian said, this is quite right. This is nothing that is being, promulgated from on high. Peter Morales isn't calling me up. I'm not wiring a clip to my ear saying, Peter's saying to me right now, have you told him about regionalism and regional governance? No. Okay? So, there are important legal and financial decisions. For example, we need to institutionalize a new successor organization that would be the legitimate legal successor for the 3 districts, the Mid-America region. And we're not quite sure whether or not we're going to incorporate in the state of Illinois, or in the state of Minnesota, state of Indiana, or all 3. We are consulting with a nonprofit consulting group and attorneys to try to make the best decision. But obviously we have an aggressive time frame because we want to be able to spin up on July 1st, 2013. Same goes for bylaws. Okay? We have a template, and the 3 presidents, as a part of a steering group for the transition team, are now consulting with Dan Hotchkiss of the Alvin Institute about platforms for governance. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Obviously, so that second bullet point is big. And get feedback, that's what we're going to try to do today, and beyond it, and create it. There are some pieces in the slides here, right? Thank you. The linkage between the congregations I talked about just a while ago, and with the UUA. It is very important, obviously, that you stay in contact with the UUA and to go to Justice GA and to speak with the district staff or to be in contact with them, virtually or otherwise. And the same goes for the staff at 25. There are members of my congregation here right now knows that we had some very difficult decisions to make with respect to our endowment just this past year. And because we think of some management issues with the company that we were using, we had a significant downward pressure on that. So we had to make a decision. And the decision we made was to put our money into the UU Common Endowment Fund. Any of those churches here or members of those churches have put their church endowment with the UU CEF? Raise your hand. That number is growing. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I can tell you that working with Tim Brennan, the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of the UA, and his staff, they have been extraordinarily accessible to us and working with us to help address our concerns. Now, Tim is on a first-name basis with my president, Alan Matthews. He's worked beautifully with their staff. And the message that comes through in all this is that we're here not just to be transparent, democratic, all that's important, but to help your congregation and its resources flourish. And that's obviously an important message. That's one small snapshot, but I encourage you, this is not a commercial for the UUCEF, but if you have concerns along those lines, that by email or by phone, to contact the staff at 25, they do really want to help us. That's my feeling. Fiscal responsibility and accountability. Nancy and Warren are going to take care of that, so I don't need to go over that. No, actually, the treasurer's group that's been meeting along with the steering committee and the transition team has been working on developing, a budget for the new region, and Warren and Nancy will be able to talk about that. But as an example of the issue of transparency, Ian was moving around feverishly yesterday to print up copies of the transitional budget and also the sort of cost list, what it's going to cost for us to spin up to this new region, because there should be legitimate concerns. If we're going to be spending the district reserves, you should know about that because it has impact on what we do with our programs. And you should ask him, not me, but him, the tough questions, and he's very happy to take those, I can assure you. Communication and technology, there's been a lot said about that already this weekend. Just a question here, and I'm going to go back to an experience. How many of you, when you're meeting with committee meetings or board meetings, use programs like AnyMeeting or Skype or free conference call now, just inside your church? I bet that if I asked that question 5 years ago, there would have been one or two hands. And I also bet that if we have that conversation 5 years from now, 95% of the hands would be raised. We use both AnyMeeting and free conference call at TUC. We've had committee meetings. We've conducted a couple board meetings that way. And on, even though it was a very mild winter, on tough winter nights when it's traveled, it's been a godsend for us. I suspect we're going to see more of that. And transition team, treasurer's team, this is how we get our business done. And I think we do get a lot of business done. Visible and inclusive. I think that's kind of what we're trying to do today. I'm going to have a table discussion at lunchtime about regionalism, and I'll pull any one of you who want to discuss this any further in a breakout session later this afternoon. I have a ton of business cards to hand out, and I want to make sure that, that the staff and I are unified in wanting to hear your concerns about this as we certainly move forward. We've had a couple of webinars about this leading up to this to district assembly, and I thought those were well attended, and we heard some great questions. There's another thing here. You can follow them up. Right. Okay, here's a little bit of our timeline. We have put together, has anyone been to our new created regional website, MidAmerica, UUA.org? And the repository of the documents that we've created, such as the covenant, which our 3 districts have crafted to put together for the region to handle our relationship with them and their staff, is on there. So if you have any questions about what happened to co-employment last year, remember that our board, along with the 2 other boards, voted to terminate co-employment so that the UUA is the sole employer of our district or regional staff. That said, the region has significant input in how that staff is assessed and managed. And how do I know? Because on that sort of section about that covenant, about management, assessment, and clawbacks and the rest of it, I wrote that with a couple of attorneys in Chicago. And again, no one at 25 called me up and said it has to have, this clause, this clause, this clause. I wrote that. And then we offered it to Teresa Cooley, and we got feedback. That was our document, not theirs. But we have an aggressive timetable to work on more of these things this summer, and to further articulate our MidAmerica vision vision and values. Documents floating around about that. Obviously, we want to try to get feedback about as we move forward and to prepare for the 2013 meeting that will allow us to essentially to dissolve the districts and to move to a region. And we're having in the Quad Cities on August 24th and 25th a joint meeting of all three boards, Prairie Star, Heartland, and CMWD, and we will have made a decision about what the governance structure will look like at that time. The sort of rollout of how we're going to talk about what that structure looks like to people will, I'm sure, happen at that weekend, and we haven't developed that just yet. There's another slide coming up. Okay, here's what you can do. Obviously, stay informed. Share this with your congregations. Give us your feedback and wisdom. And please, please, please make sure that we have a quorum and that your congregation has voting delegates at the 2013 annual meeting. I don't have nightmares very often, but I do have a fear that if there's a decision made about this when we become a region, and somebody calls Ian or me sometime in August 2013 and says, "I'd like to speak to the district president, please." Well, we don't have a district president. Well, no one told me. I didn't know anything about this.
No one told me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right here, that was a plant. We haven't actually mercifully gotten very much of that, except this morning. About having a sort of discussion about this, but certainly there will be people who will not care very much, and when it's mentioned at some point will act, well, geez, all these changes are happening. I'd like to think that our ministers and our lay leaders are trying to make this information as visible as possible. And a brief word about what potential governance structures might be out there. And this is what I'd like to have a discussion about, not quite so much now, but as we move forward. One choice was we could cede responsibility with respect to governance to the UUA board. And we have our UUA trustee, the Reverend Eric David Carlson, who's here. Eric, could you stand up just so people have a chance to see you? Thank you. And form an advisory committee that would liaise with the staff and to do linkage with the congregations about programming to make sure that we have a group of invested lay leaders who want to know what's going on in the field and to be supportive as possible and to help advise the staff. We could have a regional board that is essentially sort of like a district board writ large. And that would have responsibility for working with the staff to sort of to bless their construction of a budget, to work with our annual program fund person like Neil Lichtman, who is here, he's seated right over there, and then to help craft policies that the staff would use. That's a second option, and that's basically sort of what we have right now. The third and fourth option is something that asks a little bit more from that, and that's a question about authority. Right now, the district board doesn't have really any authority to do much, of anything. We could make life difficult for the staff. We could cut off the pipeline to the money if we have to, but it would take a lot of work to make that happen. And we certainly can't step into the congregations and say, you need to be fair share, or else. Or else what? Well, we'll be managing. We won't like you very much. You're not playing fair. No. In the Cambridge platform, crafted centuries ago, that is a foundational document for congregational polity, there is a platform, a sixth platform I think it is, about admonishment. What to do when independent congregations, are not in right relations with themselves or with others outside their congregational walls who share their same covenant and their mission and values. And what I envision potentially for a regional board is to manage and assess how well those covenants are going. That there is a sort of lateral accountability and also an accountability happening from the congregations up to the board and vice versa. There are ways in which a regional board may not be responding adequately to the congregation's needs, that you would have a right to be able to say, you're not pulling your weight, and vice versa. Now, that's a new thing for us, a very new thing. And there are some who see that as kind of like a move toward Episcopalianism, or is that, the staff or elected person would be a bishop in some way. And I'm not proposing that at all. But that's one of the ideas that's been, it's been thrown out there for people to consider. We do have an investment in covenant and how our congregations do covenant. And perhaps a regional board might have a level of responsibility that you would invest in whatever that regional board would be to help make that happen better. I think it's probably appropriate now to answer some questions about regionalism before we, if for any reason to help me stop talking about this, lather on, because there are others who need to speak and move forward the agenda. There's a microphone there, and Ian and I are happy to answer any questions.
Could you say that website slowly so we have time to write it?
Yes, it's, make sure that I've got this right, guys, please, if you would. It's www.midamericauu.org. And it has this logo. I'm wearing on my button. Yep.
Any caps?
No. No. Any other questions, Bob?
Yeah, I really like the rationale and the direction you're moving in, and am inspired too by your comments about the Unity Temple, Community Renewal Society, interfaith kinds of social justice work. It strikes me too that myself working on the Interfaith Mental Health Coalition in the Chicago suburbs and the Pathways to Promise national level mental health coalition, that in the area of social services or pastoral care, the kind of services, support services for congregations that is needed, that interfaith efforts like the Community Renewal Society, paralleling that kind of thing in the service area might be another way we could stretch our resources creatively too. And maybe there's some synergy between what the regional boards can do to help develop that.
Jim has a question, and there's a question in the back.
First, a comment that I think has reference to us, and that is that the General Assembly is progressively moving toward the possibility of people off-site actually participating through the available technology, including voting at General Assembly. So I could imagine that in a region that the same thing might occur, that those of us who are here, and others would be participating and interacting with us electronically. The other thing that, and this is the question I guess I direct particularly to Ian, if we're talking about technology, it doesn't make any difference where somebody is when it comes to electronic communication among people. It doesn't have to be you or somebody who's our regional staff, right? It could be anybody, any place in the country.
That's right. And that's why some of the things that Bill Schultz said last night are so exciting to me. This is a many-sided puzzle with lots of things changing at once. If we are going to have less specialized staff, then the idea that the service committee will have a focus on developing capacity in social justice in congregations is very exciting. And I expect there to be other I expect lots of moving pieces, only some of which are visible now. But I think that one of the things that Social Justice College is about is that we need a depth of capacity in social justice to live our values that's of support to congregations, and that there's every reason to have it be a national thing. If any of you want to see the online General Assembly this summer, it's really cool. I sit in my living room. Last year I came back and saw half of General Assembly, and it was kind of nice to be able to sit there making my own pot of coffee. We are actually behind Prairie Star in this. They had the whole thing online. They have some technical capacity that we're going to get in this deal, and it was very exciting to see.
I'd like to ask also that when you speak, if you would identify yourself and your congregation, that would be much appreciated.
Hi, I'm Gail Rock. I'm from Elliott Chapel in Kirkwood, Missouri, and past president of the St. Louis Area UU Council. I love councils. I think this is great to have it closer and having us connect with other interfaith programs in our area. I really hope that we keep the congregational polity and having it come from our congregations go hand in hand with policy governance. And they can, and the focus can be that way. I think sometimes policy governance, people come in with the idea that, okay, now I set the policy and I tell you what to do. As long as it's coming from the people of the congregations and not a power over, and coming from the strength of the congregations, it will work and it will be very powerful. I know our council, when it was going, was a wonderful council with wonderful opportunities for all the churches. And now we put things together one church at a time, one minister's idea at a time, and we have 10 people show up rather than 35 to 100. I want to see the 35 to 100 again. So I encourage this. I like the idea.
There are some folks in the back. Thanks, Gil.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hunt, credentialed religious educator from First Unitarian Church in St. Louis and a member of the leadership team for the Laredo chapter here, and I'm also on the Laredo Continental Board. And our district is unique, I think, in that the professional religious educators are awarded a vote at district assembly. And as a religious educator and Laredo member, we all would like to encourage and charge the boards to retain this value of an expansive democracy and to make sure that the voice of religious educators is retained in a new governance structure in the future.
Hi, I'm Diane Brown, Peoria, Illinois, Universalist Unitarian Church. And I'm speaking, I hope, for others who are still, like me, trying to understand. It may be like going from landlines to cell phone, and I'm stuck in the landline maybe, but I have a map of the US in my mind with the Central Midwest District, Prairie Star, all the districts. Is there a map that goes with this?
There is.
It's on the website.
Yeah, it's on the website. Some of it's on these little buttons right here, but it's actually much more sort of detailed on the website, midamericauu.org. I can speak to some of that a little bit, but are there other questions?
Well, just a follow-up for those of us not good at checking this.
Yeah.
Is it a blending of what currently exists, different?
Well, it is, that's right.
Yes.
The Heartland, Central Midwest, and the Prairie Star districts. No boundaries are being changed about that. Another question back there, Ian?
Another piece of an answer. That piece, should there be it, is the work of the UUA board. that if a congregation wants to move from one district to another, or want realignment of boundaries, that's the work of the UUA board. It's not our work. I mean, as the district, it's yours in another sense, in a larger our sense, but is that clear? Yeah.
Well,
Good morning. I'm Stephen Mead from DRA at Alton. And you said you borrowed the first slide. Well, the first slide borrowed something from the movie Toy Story, and instead of infinity to beyond, I'll use another one. Regionalism isn't flying, it's falling with style. And before you think that's pejorative from me, think again, it's not. Most of our lives are falling with style. As this regional entity comes into being, can anyone here start to help me vision what this organization will do for whom and with what resources? The three policy governance caveats that drive new adventures forward.
Ian, if you want to take a shot at that first, so we can talk about PG.
May I?
Yeah, please.
This will enable you to have a far broader group of resources at your disposal. Nominally, 6 program staff rather than the present 2, while keeping the local connections and networks that you'll still be able to phone Dory and I if that's what you want to do. And in deeper and more profound relationship with wider sets of specialized resources nationally. Well, for example, right now, if you have a legal question about ministerial compensation, there's no good way to give an answer to it. And we're, even if we know, absolutely forbidden from giving legal advice to you, for good reasons. Well, we hope that as another one of the moving pieces, we might also be able to get that greater depth of resources for you. And doing this, we don't want to say there won't be any loss, but doing this while not being further from you. I actually hope that if we create a more sustainable structure, we'll be able to see you face to face more than we have been able to the last couple of years.
I told the Laredo chapter yesterday of a statistic that I didn't use in my sermon, that the Wall Street Journal had quoted a few weeks ago 3-year research process that they did with 10 largest American corporations, and how they use social media and new technologies to facilitate meetings of staff groups who are geographically separated. A group in Toronto wants to meet with a group in Miami who wants to hook into a conference in LA, that sort of thing. And what they're finding is for expense budgets, they just manage the, look at the bottom line, the profit and loss statements of those 10 corporations. And what they found is while those companies who invested most aggressively in these technologies and met more frequently through the internet, that there also was a one-to-one correlation, a completely direct relationship between that and their desire to meet on a more increased basis face-to-face. That they would spend more money to then, after they had the conference, to say in effect, you know, I don't really think we got it as completely as we could have. We need to hang heads together, so let's jump on the plane and fly down to Miami and finish the deal off next Tuesday. That sort of conversation was happening. And I suspect, I don't necessarily want to be able to make a correlation between the American corporate world and the American religious world. Brother Harbard is looking at me with a hairy eyeball right now. For that reason. However, my suspicion is that more intense contact, and that's going to come from you. We can't do that for you. You're going to have to buy into this or to participate, respond to your need, know that the tools are there, we can help provide that for you. And my suspicion is it's going to want to engender more face-to-face contact, to Gail's point. When I came to Chicago area region, area UU Council, Third Church, people were intent to throw dirt on COP. It doesn't necessarily serve the needs of the congregations. 10 years later, in many ways, I think it's more robust than it has been in 2 decades. And I think in part for this reason. Are there any other questions? And then we need to cap it off. We've got business to do.
I have more of a comment than a question.
Yep.
And it has to do, the other side of the resources question, I think, is a movement I see in the UUA toward a more anti-democratic organization. I think that as we go to bigger regions, the likelihood that as many of us as come to these smaller meetings do is likely to diminish, and I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned that this is a tendency that I see in the larger UUA as well. The attempt of the board to stifle the actions of immediate witness, which is the one truly democratic activity that we have. And, well, I could go on, but I won't. I'm very concerned about the anti-democratic nature of some of these things that I'm seeing happen.
I'm not attempting to speak for you.
Brian, should we take one more, or?
Yeah. Please, there's no one back here. Oh yeah, well, we got a couple more then. Right, yeah, please, names. Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth Barrett from First Unitarian in Madison, and we're really excited about this regionalism because we've been a little miffed for years that we're not in the same district as the Twin Cities congregations. And they're only 4 hours from Madison. And we only see them, say, at GA or at the large congregation conference, and that only happens every 3 years. So I think this will be great you'll have more congregations of your size in this region and it's true that Prairie Star is ahead of us technologically because I attended a webinar put on by Prairie Star that was awesome. It had a really good, we all were on the phone and on the computer, and it was really great, learned a lot.
That was the last question.
No, we have, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm Barbara Kostreva from First Unitarian Madison. I just want to add, I've only been at FUS in Madison for about 8 months, and I've been in 2 other congregations, one in Dallas, Texas, and one in South Carolina, Clemson, South Carolina. And this process is terrific. I think the basic thing that maybe we're all kind of coming, since most of my experience has been in a small fellowship. I think maybe I need more elaboration, but what I'm understanding is really a greater concentration on virtual meetings is necessary for us to make the larger good. And then, what Reverend Covell has just given us is that the statistics about corporate America is that when you have more virtual meetings, more activity in webinars, use that technology to get to know people, you come together face-to-face quickly and manage your time more efficiently. Use of resources is more efficient, and people that are really involved and knowledgeable will make that extra step to visit and make that face-to-face contact. And really your leaders will have more energy and more ability to come back home and energize the rest of the congregation. But I think that issue of small congregations concern, how do we get that technology? How are these resources going to help us to the smaller congregations who aren't internet savvy, who really, I remember back in South Carolina, we were very concerned about the congregations that don't have, leadership didn't even know how to do email. Now that was several years ago. So perhaps the Midwest District is much more advanced than the TJ District.
And there's another question back here. Right.
I'm Lucy Friedrichs from Unitarian Church North. And I would like to say that maybe a word of caution about interfaith work, even though I think it's very valuable and our church is very involved in a couple of different things. But in both groups that I've been involved with, the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee and MICA, which is Milwaukee New City Congregations Allied for Hope, issues like LGBT issues, women's rights, if the conversation goes further in reproductive rights, these are things that are not even brought up at the table because it's just sort of known that there are some groups that are not going to talk about that because they're very dogmatic about it. So I think that we don't want to put ourselves in boxes of social action, and that it really requires some thought as to where we place ourselves, and possibly maybe learning to speak up more about placing ourselves. But then you go off in a whole different tangent, a sort of administrative kind of policy thing that's doesn't get to social justice, but in a very long route.
Well, to speak to that briefly, we're not going to impose, I can't imagine a regional board, district board doesn't do that now, impose a social justice paradigm on a congregation. Doesn't, I don't see that happening. That's going to be the choice of the congregation at their discretion to collaborate with UU and non-UU groups on issues as they choose. We'd like to facilitate that, as the example with CRS, but that's going to be your choice. Ian.
One of the most, I really hope that a good bunch of you are going to go to the Justice GA in Phoenix, and more of you will watch what's going on online. I know a lot of people involved in it, and one of the most interesting things is to try to figure out how to do that in authentic partnership with all the other groups who are interested in immigration issues, with whom we disagree profoundly on many subjects. And one thing I think we ought to be good at as UUs is figuring out how to cooperate over great difference. But it's not easy. It's not easy.
Dory, you said there was another. No, you're pointing to your watch saying, get going. Yes, I know. Yeah, I would really like to move forward on the issue. And again, I'm going to convene a table at lunch on this discussion. I'd really like to have as many of you as possible to be able to talk about that, particularly to address the concern about anti-democratic sentiment. I want to be hyper-democratic in listening and to be sure that I have your voice. And we've heard that throughout this weekend and beyond. But thank you very much for a rich discussion. I appreciate that.